So thank you very much, Antonia, and welcome everyone. It's great to have the opportunity to share our work with you. My name's Bhupinder and I am an expert in working with gender-based violence. I've worked in London within perpetrator programs and supported women's services for the last 25 years. I'm a trainer with the Safe and Together Institute, and I have also spent the last 10 years working within child protection systems, attempting to move practice focus from survivors to perpetrators. So that's a little bit about me. Garima, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Garima Jham. I have been working with women support services for last 10 years and on the perpetrator program for the last 3 years. Currently, I am in the training department with National Women's Aid. So that's me. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, I'm Viji Rajagopalan. I have worked in London around supporting families experiencing domestic violence for about 17 years. A bulk of that time was with a perpetrator program project called Domestic Violence Intervention Project. I'm currently taking my skills into social work. So a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Viji. So we all work together at the Respect Accredited Domestic Violence Intervention Project, where this work happened, and it happened between 2016 and 2018. And we wanted to share our work with you and our experiences of delivering what turned out to be a multilingual group for perpetrators, so over those 2 years. So can we go to the next slide? So over the next 90 minutes, we're planning to run 2 breakout sessions and then present some of our work and give you some food for thought on working with multiple languages, finding common ground and producing a shared vocabulary. So we decided that we wanted to go straight into the workshops so that, the breakout rooms, so that you could share what you were grappling with, and we'll share our experiences with you towards the end. But before we do that, we wanted to share this message with you, which is on slide 4. And that it's possible to run a multilingual program, that it can work very well, and 2 women can do it and did do it. So moving on to the next slide. Oh, Antonia, do you want to say a little bit, sorry, about the technical information before we go into the to the breakout rooms?
Sure. Yeah, just a very brief introduction. So, sorry. So we'll have small group discussions in the breakout rooms. We will make the groups. They will be automatically created. There will be 3 discussion questions in the chat. My colleague Lorna will post them in the chat so you have them available. The breakout rooms will go on for 15 minutes, and we suggest that you spend up to 5 minutes for each of the 3 questions. Then the idea is that you note down 2 points of interest from the group discussion on each of the questions. And then you will be asked, you will be asked to put them in the chat later on so we can all refer to them. Great if you can choose one person who will post those points in the chat. Lorna, do you want to take over?
Yeah, certainly. So we're gonna, as Antonia said, we're gonna put you in breakout rooms. I just wanted to check. Now we see we have 14 participants, and that's including you 3. So how many people would you like to have in each breakout room?
So is that 10 then?
Yes.
Yeah, so I guess 5 in each would be good.
Okay, so we're going to have 2 breakout rooms in total, and Yeah, so we'll assign you automatically now. You'll have 15 minutes to discuss the questions, as was said. And yes, the questions are now in the chat.
But before you do that, though, there's a couple of things that we want to say. So this morning, Dr. Naudi this morning referred to some of the difficulties in implementing this work. And I'm going to hand you over to Garima to lead you into this first workshop. Garima, do you want to say just a little bit about why we're doing this particular breakout room, why we want to have this discussion?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Bhupinder. So while we were running the program, we faced many challenges, but we had some resources so we could use to enable the production of a language-specific group. We want to know and understand what provision looks like where you are and explore barriers and challenges you face. You may not be working with this cohort yet, but this is a good place to think and share. On the slides, you will see the questions we want you to focus on. And this is a good opportunity to talk to each other. So the questions for breakout rooms are, number one, what provision is there currently? If you have not started the groups in a second language, why not? What are the barriers or the challenges are? And what needs to happen to make it possible? So spend 5 minutes on each of the questions. Note at least 2 points for each of the questions to share with the group. Thank you.
We're group 1, so I guess we can start. Easier than writing.
Thanks, Esther.
So I was voluntold, and then Holly will help when I forget things. So we had a good discussion. We were like all the different areas, and I think at the first question, if we were all having groups in a second language, most people were not. I had a slightly different experience I work in the US in Boston, so we do have a group for Spanish speakers, but I think even with that, there's so many other languages that we would need that are not happening. And I think that was the common thing. And then getting into the second question of why not? Why don't we have the groups in the other languages? This combination of either lacking people with the language skills needed, the combination of language skills and the training to facilitate the groups and how to bring that together. Especially, I think there were several people saying it's like when you have a lot of different languages, it's not even just an easy pick of, oh, we can just train somebody, in this one language. So that was one of the challenges. And then the last question was funny because we only had 1 minute. And it took us literally 15 seconds to agree that one of the big reasons what needs to happen to make it possible is money and funding for all that training that needs to happen. Did I forget anything?
Thanks, Esther. You said you were from group 1. And group 2, is there anyone from group 2 that can share with us?
I don't mind feeding something.
Thanks, Sarah.
Please, everybody kind of feed in as well. So actually there was some variance in our group in terms of the degree to which the issue is a problem currently. And we had a conversation about the form that an intervention might take and the difference kind of between making available a group work program, which I think we can all agree is our preference for, in terms of the method and way that we want to undertake the work, and that being very, very limited, and the option being a one-to-one program that seems to be the go-to, and then some of the obstacles in terms of access to interpreters. And then we had a conversation about the context around this, which is particularly for some perpetrators from, are some migrant perpetrators, that it's not just as straightforward as can we deliver an intervention in your language. It's the journey that their life has taken them on and the trauma that they may have experienced along the way, and the consideration that needs to be given to that alongside how do we tackle behavior. And that's a really complex issue. And then we concluded, we spent a lot of time kind of talking about that. And then in the last few seconds talked about, what do we need for things to change? And the consensus was political will to recognize that there are significant gaps. And of course, agreeing totally with Esther and her group about funding. Nothing's going to change until there's adequate funding in place. But we felt certainly that, there needs to be the support at a strategic level in order to create opportunity for funding to be made available.
Thank you, Sarah. Very succinct feedback. And
Sorry, Bhupinder, you've gone again with your audio.
oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? I said thank you, Sarah, for that. And I think we'll be picking up on some of the points that you made as well a bit later on in terms of the journey that we had. Is there anything else that anyone wants to share before we move on? Okay. All
There's
right.
nothing in chat, Bhupinder.
Viji?
Yes. So just moving you along in sharing our experience. So we certainly had some preconceived ideas, constructs, I'd say. We had some fears and anxieties about the men we were going to work with. And we also had fears and anxieties about what we were bringing to the work as kind of South Asian women with our own migrant experiences of migration. So, and on reflection, we found that these constructs really influenced our work and the way we worked with the men in our group. So therefore, so we're kind of encouraging you on a parallel process with us. We would like another for you to have another breakout exercise where I invite you to look at migrant man and his construction. So what makes the migrant man? What attributes does he have where you live, where you're working and living right now? What comes to mind when you think of migrant man? And I guess in this question, I'm inviting you to put your toes in an uncomfortable area, because I think we need to acknowledge that we all live in society, and we are, whether we like it or not, we are surrounded by views that we don't necessarily share, but as no matter how aspirational we may want to think about the world and people that are marginalized, we have to acknowledge that we live in a context where these discussions happen quite in crude fashion around other people who are from the outside, people who are different. So I want you to think about all of these issues when you are looking at these questions. So I don't want you to think about it as you, but I want you to think about it as you, as a member of the community, as your experience of these issues living in the community where you live. Because I think it puts a good context into doing this kind of work. It's a relevant context. Right, so I guess the questions as before will be in the chat. So what makes the migrant man? What attributes does he have? Where you live, what comes to mind when you think of the migrant man? What attributes does he not have? And how do these attributes, as you've identified them, affect how we work with them? See you in a bit.
Is everyone back in?
Welcome back. Everyone in? Back from breakout rooms? Yes, I see you all. welcome back. How did that feel, people? Can we go back to our, who would like to feedback from whichever group go, just jump in. How was that experience of looking at those questions? What did it bring up for you?
I think we had a difficult time because we thought that it's a kind of a trick question. So because we would have there was a need for a definition of a migrant man. What is a migrant man? Because it's a very unhomogenic topic, and because I'm a migrant man, everyone maybe in our group had some kind of connection to migration. So it was we had a discussion about the topic, and then we thought if we should have thought in stereotypes maybe, but this was not very easy for me or for the whole group. And please please to the other participants of my group, you can say something as well, of course.
Wonderful. Wow, looks like you had some kind of a parallel process with us as well in here, which I'll say more about later. Thank you.
Just want to add something related to the Jan, what he said. It was for me, it was the first time that I started to define migrant man. It was like a challenge just to discuss in the group because most of us was a man, and as Jan said, it's kind of stereotype because in otherwise all of us we was kind of immigration in other countries, studying or working or coming around in our work. But I totally agree with Jan. It's kind of stereotype when we talk about the migrant man. It's kind of stereotype because they are coming from different society, different culture, and it's like kind of challenges for them to integrate with lots of barriers, with lots of challenges because they are not speaking their language, and as well it's kind of different places and different societies. So it's kind of stereotypes.
Yep. We wanted you to discuss. Looks like you've done it. You've done exactly what we would have liked you to do, which was to look at the stereotypes as well as look at our relationship to those stereotypes, which is kind of what's also happened in also bringing in also a very personal, bringing in a personal, what's the word? A personal perspective as well when you talk about yourselves also being migrants. Great. Okay. Well. I guess we had all of these processes. We pretty much went through things exactly as you describe. Shall we go to the information sharing section, Bhupinder, where we can talk about these issues more deeply? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether there's any more kind of contributions. I guess I'm interested in question 2. What attributes did he not have? What did you come up for those?
I was in the second group of first, I'm not sure what that, and I'll own this, and then kind of this was my contribution when thinking about that question. When I saw it first, my immediate thought is that's a much easier question to answer than what is not. And my answer to that question is he is not powerful. He is not, the construct of success. And he is, in the UK, I would suggest he is probably white. So those kind of things, those ideas about what successful, powerful men have is probably what he is not, which is nonsense because we know that's not true. But the social construct, I would imagine, probably would find a lot of people, across ethnicity, probably certainly the power and success part of it being characteristics or attributes of somebody who's not a perpetrator. But that I own that as my own. We didn't kind of get too far with discussing it.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really kind of you to share that with us. And you make some really important points, and I think these are the ones that we wanted to kind of draw out of this. I wondered if anybody else would like to speak to that, or the question about how it affects the way that we work with him. Does anybody else want to share anything or talk to those things? Because I guess these are really central when we're thinking about working.
Maybe one thing. I think migrant men are or don't have that much privilege as men who were born or are living in the country for a longer time. So I think this has to be considered as well in the work with migrant people.
Yes, I mean, and you're right. We that did come up for us. We will talk about that as well in the next section.
All right. So if no one has anything else that they want to sort of say or share, then I'll move on. But feel free to post something if you want to raise something that you haven't. Okay, well, thank you for your participation. Looks like you were able to have some quite rich conversations with each other. Now we are going to try an interview here, so to help us to impart some of the central information to you. But if during the interview, something resonates with you, please post it on the shared document or in the chat. And we hopefully will have some time for discussion at the end. As I said earlier, I'm Bhupinder. I'm asking the questions today, but I got involved as the treatment manager. So at the Domestic Violence Intervention Project, where we all work together, we filmed all the groups and they were watched by a treatment manager, someone who was experienced in delivering group work and and knew the material. And we did that to ensure that the practitioners were delivering the workshop material in a consistent manner, that they were matching the level of service to the risk posed by the men that we were working with. Also that key learning was delivered, that practitioners were modeling respectful relationships when they were working with each other, that the participants were treated with respect, and that women and children's perspectives were brought into the room as well. And I guess this was there to enable practitioners to develop their practice. And for us, it was quite important to have that facility. So the three of us were able to traverse the core languages of Urdu and Hindi, and this allowed us to work together. And we'll talk to you a little bit more about that as we go along. But as I said, I'm going to be asking the questions today. So I'm going to start with Viji. So Viji, can you tell us a little bit about what your role was in the program?
So my role was to support the organization in recruiting and inducting a violence prevention worker who was fluent in Urdu Hindi. Yeah, and I'd been in the organization for a long time, was a manager myself, had the ear of other purse string holders, had the ear of colleagues and administrators. So my presence certainly gave the organization the confidence to offer this as an alternate provision.
And what about you, Garima? What was your role?
So my role was to deliver the program. I was co-located. I was consulting with the social workers and I was encouraging them to send the referrals to us. I used to assess the men and meet them for the risk assessment before the group. While we were doing all this, I used my specialist knowledge of honor-based violence. to help social workers to see what the real issues were. For example, I remember there was a case which initially came with the concerns for a couple's daughter, but looking over the case, it became evident that there was coercive control going on and there was honor-based violence as well. So I was able to direct the father into the program. And my role was to get men on the program, and also I used my specialist knowledge of honor-based violence to support referrals in using the program effectively.
Garima? So how did it come about? How did you come to be running this program in other languages? How did this happen?
So the organization had already been commissioned to deliver perpetrator programs in this particular area of London. We refer to them as boroughs. I'll just use the term district. It might be easier because it might not be meaningful to you. So in this particular district of London, there was a high proportion of South Asian communities living there. As I said, we were already there. We'd been working in that area. By we, I mean the organization for about 5 or 6 years before that. And in the duration of our work in that area, we kept coming across men who could not access the mainstream provision in English. And even at the time in the organization, all language provision was delivered with in a one-to-one format with interpreters. So as I said, our colleagues on the ground working in this area kept coming back with coming across fathers who were suitable, who were ready to address their behavior, but who were kind of placed on a wait list because to work with them, there was a need for interpreters. That was a resource issue. The work would have to be done in one-to-one. Again, that was a resource issue. So we just had a growing list of fathers who were not in any kind of service, although they were eligible for it, just because there's a lack of resource and a lack of provision to provide them one-to-one intervention. So I guess what we were able to say as a service delivery organization to the local authorities, to the local government, we were able to say, we're not working with these families. My presence and ongoing conversations within the organization resulted in, positing an alternative, meaning that you could work with these men in a group. And we just kept bringing it up. We kept bringing up the ethical issues around lack of provision to a group of people that solely along diversity issues. And then as a result, over a period of about I'd say about a year, the local government then came back to us saying they had extra resources to fund a group work program.
And I guess just sort of like, sort of listening to you talk, I know that this was a problem across many boroughs or districts in London, where actually, the local government had a duty of care. But what was happening was that those whose first language wasn't English were not getting a service or were getting a second-class service, which meant that some of the most vulnerable people, in London weren't getting a service. And we were constantly pointing out that this was a discriminatory practice.
Just to say, there's been a question in the chat about which local borough it was. It was the local borough of London Borough of Ealing, that actually put their hands in their pocket, took the money out. Yeah, just to say for Joanna. Go on, Bhupinder.
So can you tell me a little bit about what the challenges were? So you've already talked a little bit about actually what the challenges were that led you there, but what were the challenges about once you got the funding? What were the challenges for you?
Well, we had preconceived ideas about group work and how to run a perpetrator program. We at DVIP, we do still and have run the Duluth Model, which talks about modeling healthy and respectful relationships in a perpetrator program by co-delivery between a male and female co-deliverers of the co-facilitators of the program. So off we went trying to find a male facilitator initially. actually we recruited Garima, but then we thought we would find a male facilitator to work alongside her to deliver the program. And that was difficult. It wasn't fruitful because well, we did find someone, we trained them. They weren't quite where they needed to be in terms of their own personal process. At the time, DVIP had just started delivering the mainstream service with 2 women because of practical need. We also had a senior management person at the time who had a history of probation work where they would routinely deliver groups as 2 women facilitators, 2 female facilitators. So there was a number of things. There was an issue around kind of people waiting for a service. There was an issue of resources being available and expectation of service being delivered. So we went ahead and started the work as 2 women.
So Garima, for you, you were a skilled women's practitioner when you came into this process. Can you tell me a little bit about what the challenges were for you?
Yes, so for me, even though I have been working in this field for long, my background was women support. It was the first group with men. It became an eye-opener for me. I had never really considered myself working with perpetrators. So now I am sitting in front of them. I am talking to them. I am doing the risk assessment. It was not an experience I ever had. Coming into the contact with a person who was not a monster as I had imagined. So he's talking to me in my own language. He's talking about things, about the issues, what he's facing at home, and I could understood culturally. And I thought, yeah, okay, that's for me, I can do it.
Thanks, Garima. I'm going to come back and ask you a little bit more about that a bit later. But first, I want to move on to thinking about the content and the program. Can you tell me a little bit about how you approach that?
Well, firstly, I think this has come up already in group 1 in earlier. When we were trying to negotiate the contract, people didn't have an understanding around the commonalities of languages. So I think our American colleague talked about Spanish. We had a similar process because amongst referrers, even amongst my colleagues, at the organization, there wasn't an understanding about different groups having a working knowledge of a language that wasn't their mother tongue. I know it's quite complicated to even get your head around as I'm talking about it, I think. Because also the British public is not particularly linguistically diverse. I'm talking about as in the people that are born and raised here. So there was not an understanding of well, if you've got a language you communicate in, you've got a language you can speak in with your a mother tongue. But in the case of Urdu and Hindi is a link language amongst many South Asian groups who might not even have Urdu and Hindi as a mother tongue, but have another language which they call their mother tongue. So there was me and Garima both being from the South Asian subcontinent. We had an understanding of this, which I had to repeatedly, in all of our work in setting this group up, we had to repeatedly go through this with referrers and also with colleagues. So it being like this, so there'd be a man assessed. He speaks. He's Afghani. He says he speaks. What's his mother tongue? Pashto Dari. Oh, can you go back to him and ask him? Can he speak Urdu? Because if you didn't go back to him and ask him that, he wouldn't be putting Hindi or Urdu down. But these are languages he would know, and because of the vast influence of Bollywood as well, and also because of the fact that the historical interrelationship with all these countries. So therefore the groups we ended up with had people from a cross section. We had Bangladeshis, we had Pakistanis, we had Nepali, we had members from the Pakistani and Punjabi community, both in Pakistan and India. We had Gujaratis attending as well. These were all groups that spoke Urdu Hindi. Urdu Hindi being the same spoken language in a different script. So that was and then sometimes when we actually were in the group, we were constantly in negotiation about words. Words we would find in Urdu would sometimes have a counterpart in Hindi, but then yet not. And so we would search amongst the men to find out what their local vernacular was. And sometimes we landed up in English, actually, because I remember the word that was easiest to use for sex was sex. There was we didn't come by a word in Urdu and Hindi. It was that sat well, a kind of vernacular in a vernacular translation. So that was it. So we didn't have because of that, we didn't have a common script, because there was no one script to translate into. The whole program had to be delivered in an oral way. So we had to translate as we went along. And along with the change in group composition as well, we would collect words. A good example of that being the Punjabi word for handsome. If a man is gabru, but that was quite a search, because there were lots of words for beautiful for a woman, but we had to really search for a man that literally a word that translated from stud, as in gorgeous fellow, like a stunner. We had to really search amongst the men in both languages. And this wasn't something I'd experienced. I have delivered mainstream perpetrator programs, and this wasn't something that I had experienced at all, this kind of mutual exploration in language. That was quite unique and different.
And there was something else. They helped us. If we were stuck somewhere, we got the help from the group. They were helping us, talking to each other and trying to negotiate what word can be the right one for this one. And they helped us to find the right word for delivering the program, which was very interesting.
Yeah, so when we were talking about this previously, what the two of you said was that finding these words, coming together and thinking about them, became fun at times. You told me that they were a bridge, between you. There was this ongoing negotiation around language and words. And quite often it broke the ice when you were talking about really difficult subjects. And you were saying that, you were all trying together and in effect building trust. Viji, I remember you saying that, this wasn't something that you'd experienced when you were delivering the mainstream program. And I think the other thing that came up while we were in conversation was that you were also modeling how to negotiate difference, how you get a shared understanding, when you have a group of people who are culturally and linguistically different from each other.
Yeah.
And that this really had parallels with negotiating power with their partners, which was something that we were discussing. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that in because it was something that that had come up when we were discussing this. So
Bhupinder, just to say, we have 5 minutes left.
Thank you, Antonia. So it sounds like you had quite a positive experience, but I know from my own experience that positive regard for the person in front of you, having positive regard for the person in front of you and balancing that with keeping in mind, what they've done can sometimes be tricky. There were, you said that there were lots of commonalities between you. How did you avoid getting sucked in?
Well, I guess, yeah, it was massive. It was massive to neither of us expected to be received in the way that we were, we didn't expect the deference we received. We didn't expect that men would come to us with a sense of relief and wanting to share their experiences and struggles. So all of that was a great surprise. But whenever, and I guess in that way, we saw the men, we saw them as kind of friendly and in need of support and, using good help-seeking skills. And that helped us, I think, to align ourselves with her experience of him. He can sometimes be like that with her at home, his partner. Sometimes he can't be like that. Sometimes he's really harsh and abusive to her. And I think we were able to, being able to relate to them in that way, I think it also helped us link in to her, to focusing the work on her and the children, and how their needs had to be the focus in our work with them, rather than, you know, just enjoying the feeling of being familial and being a respected figure in their eyes.
You said previously that you'd felt like an outsider in your community.
I did. And up until then, yes, I certainly did. And that was why some of my anxieties and fears were that I wouldn't be regarded, and I wouldn't be listened to. So I had to keep an eye on that, because the feeling of homecoming was, when I did work with them, was quite significant. So I had to really keep my focus on working to the welfare of the women and the children, rather than enjoying that sense of familiarity and deference.
Because that was something that we talked about quite a bit in treatment management. And I guess it's also one of the first times that maybe you had felt that, you know, you'd been held in such high esteem, you know, which is really unusual for a woman in perpetrator
Working in
programs.
perpetrator services.
Yeah, but very unusual for an Asian woman in those services as well. And just before I wrap this up, I mean, I've got a lot more here, but we're really restricted by time. Garima, could you just say a little bit about the service that was provided for women?
Yeah, speaking of women, there was no language specific intervention for them. The partner work, women support service, it was done by one-to-one through an interpreter. And I did not feel comfortable about it. I felt that the perpetrator, they were getting a better deal because the program is run in their own language. And I guess it was a resource issue.
So I guess, were we to have the opportunity to do this again, that's something that we would fight really, really hard for. You know, so it's not that they didn't get a service, but it's not the service that we would have wanted them to have. Antonio, I know that you said we've got 5 minutes left. You know, there's much more that, you know, I could talk about. You know, one of the things we want to talk about was that, you know, no one really dropped out during that time, you know, during the time of the program.
So just to answer in the chat, the program is still not running. We lost funding, basically. Yeah.
But I think one of the important things, I just before we close, and I don't want to miss this, was that actually one of the things that the men could bring into the group was their experience of racism. And when they did that, we were also then able to make sure that the space that was there for them was also free of their own prejudices. So you might want to think about men being able to express their experience of racism or prejudice, you know, and within our cohort that we were working with, you know, we knew that they wouldn't be comfortable to do that with white people present. You know, my own experience of sharing the racism that I've experienced with white colleagues has often resulted in me having to emotionally support them when they feel bad for what's happened to me. So I think that was another facet that allowed the group to function in the way that it did. Yeah, I think they were also, I think we noticed they were a lot more compliant with authority as well.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Sorry, we have a really short of time. Would you like to finish the sentence or the point you made, Bhupinder?
No, it's okay. I think it's a good place to stop. I could go on. I've got lots more, but
yeah,
it's just important that we start the conversation and have the dialogue.
Yeah, yeah.